Good morning to each and everyone, especially to our instructor, Sir Tordomato Jr. Today we are going to present and discuss Module 10, the Commonwealth period. This presentation will be delivered by my companions, Kanyete, Payaw, Suryo, Arbis, and myself. We hope this discussion will help you better understand the important events and contribution during the Commonwealth period. And the first presenter will be
So
Messias
the
Abraham.
first objectives is what events precipitated the creation of the Commonwealth government in the Philippines. First, the benevolent assimilation in 1898. It is announced by the US President William McKinley proclaimed that the Philippines are not for the US government to exploit, which means the US government is not here in the Philippines para gamiton ng Pilipinas. In addition, the US government, they don't take the advantage sa pagtabang nila sa Pilipinas. In fact, the US government claimed that it's not taking the resources or wealth in the Philippines, but they here to help to develop our economy, civilize our laws, culture, and social norms, and also to educate our young Filipino, and also to train the government in the science for the future. So the second is the promise of future independence. The US promised independence once stable government were established. So ang US government is nag-make sila og condition sa Pilipinas nga once ang Philippine government is ma-handle na gid na sa mga Filipino, or kanang ma-stable na ang pagpadagan sa mga Filipino ang government, so that ang US government is ihatag na nila ang independence nga ginapangayo sa mga Pilipino. So the Filipino leaders trusted and promised and cooperate with them. So tanan nga mga leader is nag kanang ilang gi suportahan to, ilang gi accept ang promise, and nag-cooperate sila. But the many Filipino people didn't agree with that condition. Pero they work within the system to push more participation and ultimately the independence. So the next is the Philippine Bill in 1902. The US government established a civil government. So ilahang gi-replace ang military rule with a civilian government composed of a American people and a Filipino people, with a law, council, and administration instead of military approach, because ang nagtot ang US nga it is a way, it is the best way to civilize the compared to the military approach. Kay ang military approach is kanang it is like martial law, like ang mga military ang naikusog nga mo dakop og kanang murag sila ang magulo-ulo kanang mga military. So mo na ang US government is ilan ang gitatag ang civilian government kay para kanang maiwasan na ang mga mga pagpasakit sa mga Pilipino. The next one is the delay in granting independence. So after 10 years pass with no clear move toward independence, na dira na nagkuan ang mga Filipino, nila nang i-question ang katong giingon sa US government nga as soon as nga ang government is ma-stable na, tagaan na sila og kalayaan. Pero after 10 years nga wala jud improvement, nagduda na ang mga Filipino people kay nganong 10 years na lang nila bay tapos wala pa jud daw stable ang government, bisag ning tabang na ang US government. So ang Filipino politician is began to pressure the US government. Ilan na yung gina-pressure ang mga US government, then nag-ask mga question, then also kanang naghatag sila og kanang mga mars rally ana. So the next one is the Jones Law of 1916. So after that 10 years, the Filipino leaders actively push petition on labid. Ang labid kanang iladjong kanang nag-negotiate sila sa mga sa US government, like iladjong gina-pressure jud nga dapat nga makuha na nila ang kalayaan nga ilang ginahangad, kay after 10 years na lang wala pa jud improvement nga nahitabo. So the effort of the effort of the Filipino people nga gi-force nila nga ang US government is mahatag na jud nila ang ilang gusto nga ginahangad. And that is nag-promote sila og Philippinization of Philippinization of government. Ang means ng Philippinization is kanang ang more Filipino nga allowed na sila nga mo handle og kanang government nang ilang i-replace ang mga Americans nga mag-handle ana nga kanang government. So the law is restated that independence was still ultimately goal. Mupag na ilang goal hantod kanang after 10 years, ang goal jud sa mga Filipino is makuha gid nila ang kalayaan nga ilang ginahangad. So the first independence mission during the 1931, led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas. So sila ang gisend sa Philippine government into the USA para maglabing sila dito, like kanang i-persuade nila ang US government nga dapat makuha na nila ang kalayaan nga ilang ginakamit. So sila pod ang official representative para mag-negotiate sa mga US people, US government. So after that, Filipino persistent lobbying and participation na-succeed nila and na-achieve ang independence. Thought it is take decades kanang nagkuha na jud kanang after pila jud ka decades nga of negotiation and persuading US government, nakamit ra jud nila ang kalayaan. And the leader in the fight for the Philippine independence from the US is si Manuel L. Quezon. So siya ang first nga president of the Commonwealth during the 1935 to 1944. Lastly, the Hair Hughes Cutting Act during the 1933. So mo ni ang first kanang law independence nga gitatag sa Pilipinas and ilahang gipasa sa US Congress. And after that, kanang ang is nag-provide ni siya og 10-year transition period before full independence. Like kanang kailangan pa og moagi og 10-year nga transition before siya mahimo siya og kanang full jud nga independence sa mga Filipino people. And Manuel L. Quezon is yaning ga-reject nga law because kanang it is allowed US military bases to remain in the Philippines. So it means doon ang kanadang nga law is gi-allowed ang mga military base nga allowed pa ang mga military nga magstay diri sa ato ang Pilipinas. And also after ato independence, and also it imposed economic and trade restriction. So it means pod is ang US government is gahatag pod sila og kanang restriction sa economic and trade. Mura gyapon sila og gahandle about sa mga economic and restriction sa atong trade. So the second objective is what was the purpose of creating the Philippine Commonwealth. So the first purpose is to educate and train Filipino people in self-government. So the Philippine Commonwealth was created to serve as a transitional government. So it means is kanang gitatag ni siya kay para mahanda or ma-practice sa mga Filipino people ang pag self-government o pag-handle sa own nga government for full independence from the US states by allowing Filipinos to gradually take control their own government. Okay? Para kanang kabalo na sila mo handle sa own nga government. And also, is to prepare the country for full political independence. Para ma-aim nila and ma-train ang mga Filipino leaders in self-governance. Then, para tapos ma-establish nila ang democratic institution and promote economic and social development and strengthen the national unity during the transition period before the country became fully independent nation.
And the next presenter is Eliza Cañete.
Good morning, sir. I am Eliza Cañete and I am the reporter of number 3 in Module 10, the Commonwealth period. In number 3, more on reaction to the issue of the Philippines' independence during the Commonwealth period. There are many types of moral reaction. There are morons that morons are not united. The shift to the Philippines independence caused mixed reaction among the morons. Maraming mga moros sa iba't ibang mga reaction. May iba namang tumututol sa independence ng Pilipinas kasi gusto nila ng proteksyon ng Amerikano. Meron namang gustong mga moros na meron namang iba na gusto agad ang mga kalayaan ng mga moros or mga Kristiyano Pilipino. Some Morons leaders supported immediately and complete independence, and they wanted Mindanao and Sulu included with the rest in the Philippines, and some leaders are supported who support the Philippines independence because they have the benefits from the Philippines governance system and they have political or business ties with the Christian Philippines. Statement supporting unity and independence. According to Datu Auraya Dianalan in 1926, rejected the division of the country, emphasized unity with the Christian Filipino. According pa kay Datu Araya na mali ang mga plano ng Amerika na paghiwalayin ang Moros at Kristiyano. According naman kay Datu Fancundo Mandi in 1930, declared that the Moros wanted absolute and immediately independence. Para pa kay Datu Fancundo Mandi, dapat daw agad ang pagiging malaya ng mga Pilipinas. According naman kay Dato Ibra in 1931, asserted that the Filipino, Moro, and Christian alike were one united, sharing the same race and land. Ayon pa sa kanya, kahit iba-iba tayo ng religion, maging Moro ka man o maging Kristiyano, iisa tayo ng dugo at lahi. Opposition and fear independence. Many Morons oppose Filipino independence, and they fear that Christian majority will rule the Morons in the future. Many Morons want the Morons independence and Christian independence. Some of the Morons suggested that they want own Morons independence and they want own Christian independence. And they want temporary protection from America because they feel that America has the protection they need. Reason for opposition: fear of marginalization. Moron voice might be ignored in the Christian dominant government, threat or conflict. Dato Iskaluran said he would fight if independence harmed moral interests. Culture and politician difference. Morons fear loss of autonomy. Moros who wanted continue American rule. Haji Abdullah Dato di Mampaso Dangkal believe that American provide the fairness, the justice, the impartial leadership, and the implicitly rejected independence. Reason for supporting American rule. Dato di Mampaso Dangkal state, we do not want independence. Ayaw niya maging independence dahil nga baka daw hindi sila papakinggan ng mga Pilipino pag tumatagal na panahon. Morons believe that the U.S. could provide impartial leadership and Americans will protect Morons' rights better. Constitution concern. In 1935, Constitution raised Moron's fears. Morons felt excluded during the new government. No clear provision protected Moron welfare. Dansalan Declaration in 1935. Haji Abdul Kamid Bugabog criticized the Constitution. He stated the Constitution favored Christian Filipinos and ignored the Morons' needs. And so the result of that caused to exclude Mindanao and Solo from the independence. Conclusion, Moron's reaction reflected deep uncertainty and fear. Many wanted American protection, and despite Moron's repetition, Mindanao and Sulu is recluded in the Philippines.
The next presenter is Via Shane Payao.
Quezon's policy towards Mindanao and how did this affect the Moros and Luman. So when Manuel L. Quezons assumed the Commonwealth presidency, he identified three major priorities for Mindanao. First was the development of Mindanao for the national economy. Second was the strengthening of security in Mindanao and nearby islands. The third was the advancement and integration of the Moro population. However, while these priorities took balance on paper, Quezon's focused most of his time and resources on the first two, leaving very little effort for the third priority, which directly concerned to the Moros and Luma. Economic development of Mindanao. According to the observation of the historian Peter Cowen, the Commonwealth government in 1935 was facing serious economic problems. The Philippine economy depended heavily on the free trade with the United States, which was expected to end. At the same time, Luzon and the Visayas were already crowded, with many landless farmers and unemployed workers creating social and political tension. Because of this, the government saw Mindanao and Sulu as the solution. These regions has the vast, fertile, and largely undeveloped lands. The Commonwealth believed that Mindanao could produce new export crops such as rubber, cotton, and cacao, while also expanding older export like copra, sugar, and tobacco. This would help revive the national economy. So in addition, Mindanao was seen as the place where migrants from Luzon and Visayas could settle, reducing population pressures and unrest in those regions. So this policy shows that Mindanao was developed mainly for the national economy interest, not primarily for the benefit of its native inhabitants, but the development was centered on what Mindanao could give to this country, especially to the Luzon or Manila-centered government, rather than on the needs of the Moros and Lumans. So the effect on the Moros and Lumans. For the indigenous people, the Mindanao, this policy was serious consequences. As Christians migrants arrived in the large numbers, Moros and Lumans lost control over much of their ancestral lands. The land registration system favored settlers were familiar with illegal processes, while the indigenous communities practiced Commonwealth land ownership, which was not recognized by the government. As the result, many Lumans or Muros were displaced or marginalized in their own homeland. This explains why they could not relate to the Mindanao being called the land of the promise, since the promise of the progress and prosperity did not apply equally to them. So the second priority of President Manuel L. Quezon regarding Mindanao, which focused on national security and how the policies meant to protect the nation eventually, was the situation in the region. So during the Commonwealth period, the Quezon's government identified two major threats to national security in Mindanao and Sulu. First was the presence of many non-Christian population, particularly the Moros and Lumans. So the government views this group as a security concerns because they were perceived as not fully loyal or cooperative with the Central Philippines government. So this perception was influenced by cultural and religious differences, as well as long history of resistance and Moros and outside rule. So the second perceived threat was the growing numbers of the Japanese agriculturists and entrepreneurs in Davao. By the late 1920s and the early 1930s, the Japanese expansion in Asia was already widely known. Because of this, the Commonwealth government feared that a strong Japanese presence in Mindanao could endanger Philippines' sovereignty and the national security. To respond to the threats, the Quezon's administrations promote the policy of mass migration. The government encouraged Christian settlers from the Luzon and the Visayas to move to Mindanao and Sulu. So this strategy was seen as the solution of both economy and security problems. This would develop the lands economically, with strengthening government could over the region. From the 1936 onwards, so this migration became the extensive that is surprised the migration rate during the American colonial period. While this policy succeeded in increasing agricultural production and population growth, it also led to serious problems, especially for the Moros community. So according to historian Peter Going, provinces such as the Lanao and Cotabato were most affected. The Moros found itself as a disadvantage compared to the new settlers. One major reason was the land registration system. The Moros traditionally believed in communal owner of land, while the government required individual land titles. Because of this system was unfamiliar and confusing, many Moros did not register their land. So when they sought help from the government official, they often received little assistance as officials were either too busy or unresponsive. Even this, who managed the file land claims, became discouraged due to the long delays and uncertainty in approval. As the result, much of their land was legally awarded to settlers, not because the Moros has no right to it, and because they were excluded by the system.
The next presenter will be Koji Soryo.
Manuel L. Quezon's third priority for Mindanao, which was integration of the Moro and Lumad population into the Philippine nation. While this goal appeared progressive, its implementation caused more harm than benefit to indigenous communities. Quezon's concept of integration. Quezon believed that national unity could only be achieved if Christians and non-Christians were treated under the same laws. He viewed integration as the uniform application of state laws without considering cultural and religious differences. In a speech delivered to a Mernal audience on June 6, 1936, Quezon stated that Muslims and Christians were one people governed by the same executive and laws, and that Muslims would receive exactly the same treatment as Christians under the law. While Quezon intended to promote equality, his statement ignored cultural pluralism. Treating everyone the same assumes that all groups share the same values, traditions, and social systems, which was not true for the Moros and Lomads. Conflict with indigenous cultural practices. Quezon's insistence on uniform laws clashed directly with indigenous customs. For example, the state recognized only monogamous marriages, reflecting Christian norms. However, some Moro and Lumad communities practiced polygamy, which was culturally and religiously acceptable to them.
Under the new legal system, second and succeeding marriages among Moros and Lomas became illegal. This meant that wives and children from these women were suddenly considered illegitimate, causing social exclusion, legal problems, and cultural alienation. Abolition of traditional institutions. Quezon also declared that sultans and datos would have no special rights, emphasizing that all citizens were equal before the law. As a result, his administration disseminated institutions that recognized indigenous governance. In January 1937, the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes were abolished. This bureau had been the only agency specifically addressing the administrative needs of non-Christian groups. Quezon also ended official recognition of the tradition Moro titles and abolished the Moro Board, which handles disputes based on Islamic and customary laws. So, although justified as a step toward equality, these actions removed systems that were culturally appropriate and effective for Moros and Lomads. Indigenous peoples were forced to use regular courts that did not understand or respect their traditions. And destruction of traditional leadership. Under the traditional system, leaders such as datos and sultans were not salaried officials. Their authority came from service and sacrifice. They supported community events, helped families in need, funded projects from their own resources, and risked their lives to protect their people. So leadership was based on moral authority and genuine respect, not money or political power. However, were placed with government-appointed salaries officials, leadership became associated with personal gain. Officials received salaries and funds for civic projects, some of which were misused for personal enrichment. Consequences of new system. The new system of governance introduced alien values into indigenous societies. Leadership positions became desirable resources of wealth, leading to competition, clean conflicts, and even violence. So, instead of serving the community, leadership became politicized. This fundamentally altered the indigenous concept of governance and weakened traditional social cohesion.
And the last reporter will be BNRB's Romeo.
So lesson learned and peace message. So the Commonwealth government was intended to prepare Filipino for independence and self-governance. While it benefited many Christian Filipino leaders, Moros and Lomads were largely excluded from political participation due to limited access to education and government position. As a result, they experienced marginalization during this period. So President Quezon policies focuses on strengthening and centralize the government, but they often ignore the cultural diversity and unique needs of Mindanao native peoples. The uniform application of law overlooks the traditional leadership system, creating fear, insecurities, and distrust among Moros and Lumads. So the experience teaches us that peace and unity can only be achieved through exclusive governance and meaningful conclusion to all sectors and society. Respecting cultural diversity, and multi-stakeholders approach is also essential, building lasting peace and national solidarity.